it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be creating another Lawn Fawn card using Pick of the Patch, Spring Basket Add-on Fall, Treat Cart Add-on Coffee, Absolutely Awesome, Porcupine for You, Happy Harvest, and the Yappy Birthday Add-on. So I've stamped those images on Catherine Pooler Favorite White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm super excited to be doing another card featuring the treat cart. I absolutely just love that image, and I think it's so versatile for so many different settings and seasons. And so today I'm going to be creating a fall card, and it's going to be starring my favorite critter, which is the red squirrel. So for those red squirrels, I'm going to use E11, E13, E15, E17, and E18. Coloring darkest to lightest, so I'm starting with that E18 and laying in my shadows down the back of their bodies. That way their face will stay nice and light and highlighted so that we can make out all of their adorable features. I'm going to blend out that E18 with the E17. And I'm going to do them both at the same time since they're fairly small and right next to each other. So I can just do that rather than switching back and forth between markers for each one. I'll blend out that E17 with the E15, and I'm going to fill in the majority of their body. I'm just going to leave their face and belly with the white right now so that I can use those lightest two shades for that. And then once I have that filled in with that E15, I'll come in with the E13, bring that a little bit closer on their muzzles and on the side of their bellies. And then I'm going to fill in with that E11 for a nice soft highlight. And I love this combo for red squirrels. I just think it makes them look so cute. So now I'm going to come in with a golden combo, and I'm going to color the liquid in the glass to be apple cider, and I'll color the apple cider jug the same. I'm using Y11, YR21, and YR23. So the two YR shades are going to give me that really rich golden tone. And then the Y11 is going to just warm that up a bit to just make it look more inviting. So once I have those two items colored, I will also use these shades on a few of the fall leaves. Then I'll switch to some brown shades. I'm going to pull out E21, E23, E25, and E27. I'm going to use just the darkest three shades on the slats of my apple barrel and also for the base of my tree stump. So starting with that E27, then I'm going to blend out with the E25, and I'll fill in with that E23. And by the way, I'm going to color that additional set of images that I showed you on the second panel at the beginning of the video. I'm going to do that one off screen just to save some time in the video today. Otherwise, we'd be here for a really long time. But I did use the exact same combos on that sheet as what I used on this panel. So I'm going to do the E21, and then I brought in E000 for the top of that tree stump. I also used that for my happy fall sign and my little pie. Then I'll switch to some rusty orange shades. I'm going to use YR12, YR14, and YR18 for all of my pumpkins. I'll add some shadows into the grooves that the artists have drawn and do that with the YR18, and then I'll start blending that out with the YR14, just going right over the edge of that YR18 to soften that and pull that into the mid-tone. And then I will bring in my lightest shade, which is going to be the YR12, and I'm just going to fill those in. I also pulled down a little bit of that pumpkin that's kind of cut off from the Spring Basket fall add-on, because that one just kind of leaves a little bit of white space at the bottom so you can tuck it behind the basket, but I wanted to give it more of a rounded shape. And once I finish my pumpkins, I will again use these shades for a few of the fall leaves. I'm going to bring in some green tones. I'm using YG11 and YG17, and I will use that for my apple leaves. But I'm also going to add a little bit of green to my apples. I did my pumpkin stems and the one pumpkin leaf as well. But I'm going to have a little spot of green on my apples. I have an apple tree that is full of apples right now. They're not quite ripe. It's Macintosh apples, but every single one of them has a little bit of green on them. So I am kind of mimicking the apples that are on the tree in my yard. And then for the red parts, I'm going to bring in R22, R24, and R29. I will start with the darkest shade, that R29, the farthest from the green, and then blend out with the R24, and then the R22 is what's going to overlap into the green area, and then I'll go back to that YG11 and just go over the green once again to help those two colors blend. And I will also use that red combo for a few more of the leaves and the little apple that is on the cider jug. I decided to also do the leaf that is in front of the pumpkin in that little cluster with the Happy Fall sign, just because I thought that that would stand out the most of the three leaf shades next to that pumpkin. And then I used R20 and R22 to give my squirrels some rosy cheeks. I'll bring in some warm grays. I'm using W00, W1, and W3. And I'm going to do every other stripe on the awning of the treat cart and then also the framework of the treat cart. So I'm starting with the W3. And then for the awning, I'm actually going to leave a little bit of white space as well. I did want it to look more white, but just have some definition to it, where I want the framework of the treat cart to look a little bit more silver. So for those areas, I'm going to fill them in completely. But on the awning, I'm going to leave a little bit of white space to give it a bit of glow so that we have that little bit of extra highlight there. And then once that is all filled in, I'm also going to use the W3 for the little leaves next to the Happy Fall sign, which I thought looked like pussy willows. And then I did the base of my pie tin. And I used the W00 to give a little bit of shading to my glass. And then I'm going to darken up this combo by keeping the W3 but adding in W5 and W7. And I will do the little hand grip of my treat cart, both of the wheels and also the metal slats that are going horizontally across my apple barrel. And I did decide to go over my pie tin with these darker shades as well. I did that off screen. But for all of this, I started with the W7, blended out with the W5, and then I'll use the W3 as the highlight. So far, the color palette has been very warm and fall-like, which I was absolutely going for. But sometimes I like to throw a little bit of a different kind of tone in the mix just for more variety, a little bit of extra contrast, a little something unexpected. So I decided to throw a cool tone in here, and I went with blue violet. So I'm using BV01, BV02, and BV04 for the rest of the stripes on my awning and also the center stripe on the base of that treat cart. And I accidentally used the BV04 for the highlight on that first little section. So I am going to do a second layer of that area off screen and also the center section just to smooth out that blend a bit. but then I will trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to use the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil to add a sky to this. And I wanted something that would match with the blue violets that I used on that treat cart awning. So I am going to bring in some shaded lilac for my sky. And I'm going to add that, but it was looking a little bit too purple. So I'm going to soften that out with some speckled egg. This is a very gray blue tone that is very pale, and I think together it created a really interesting effect. It almost looks like night is falling and the sky is looking really dusky, and I was very pleased with how it turned out. So I'm going to do that for the rest of these clouds, just turning that stencil to get a different cloud formation, and then adding the shaded lilac first, and then going in with a little bit of the speckled egg. And I will do 3 of these layers of clouds. And then once I have that done, I'm going to add a little extra ink down below just so that last bottom cloud isn't so stark white. I did the speckled egg first since I had it in my hand, and then added a little bit of the shaded lilac. And then I'm going to grab the Slimline Grassy Stencil, and I'm going to use that to add some grass to the lower part of my panel. It's a little bit more than the bottom third, but not quite half that I'm going to go up. And the first shade that I'm going to bring in is Rustic Wilderness. So I'm just going to hold that stencil firmly in place and press down where those little areas are that create the grass in the stencil, but try not to bend up those fragile little edges. So I'm kind of pushing down firmly, but I'm not kind of sweeping across it very hard. And then once I have that darker color laid in, I'm going to bring in some bundled sage down at the bottom, fill the rest of that in, and then I'll work back and forth between those 2 blending tools so that I get a smoother blend that just fades softly down at the bottom. And then once I'm happy with that, I will just set this aside to dry. Once it has dried, I will pop that in my MISTI so I can stamp a sentiment. I'm going to use VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it lays nicely over Distress Oxides, and I'm using the Many Thanks sentiment from Happy Harvest. I'm going to stamp that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold, and then I'll set that aside to dry again. And in the meantime, I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using lilac cardstock from Lawn Fawn, and I didn't have a purple ink that would match the cool tone of the front except for Dusty Concord Distress Oxide ink, so that's what I went ahead and used. Now I'm ready to start assembling, so I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of my focal panel and adhere that to my card front. Just smooth that down into place and make sure it's on there nice and straight, and then I can bring in my images. I'm going to have this beautiful apple tree over toward the right hand side of the card, and I wanted to cut that in fairly close to the sentiment. So I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of that and just make sure that we still clearly see the end of that sentiment, but I want that tree to be nestled in there pretty close. And then I'm going to have the little treat cart right beneath it over on the left. Before I glue that down, I just want to make sure that I've got my little squirrel ready to go so I can tuck him in behind that opening. He is going to be the proprietor of this little treat cart that is going to be selling various different apple flavored delicacies. So I'm going to grab that squirrel while that treat cart is still wet and just tuck him back behind. And then I want to add that little leaf banner down below on the lower part of the treat cart. to give the other little squirrel a boost so that he can see what is for sale in the little treat cart, I'm going to add the stump between the treat cart and the apple tree, and then I'll put him right on top. I think he looks so cute. I just love these squirrels so much. And then I'm going to start decorating the lower part of the scene with all of these various little accessories like the bushel of apples and the pumpkins. I'm going to take that little pumpkin cluster from the spring basket add-on fall and just trim off that bottom white edge. And that way I'll be able to hide the cut edge a little bit easier with the grasses and leaves. So I'm going to add the smaller pumpkin over on the right hand side of the card so that we have some balance. Pull some of that orange over to the opposite side so it really drags your eye around the scene and helps you take in all of the various details. And I'm gluing everything on this card flat down just to make it easier for mailing. I already have somebody in mind that this card is going to, so I just wanted to make it easier on myself for that. Sometimes it's nice to just have everything on one layer. I'm going to give the little squirrel the glass of apple cider to hold. And then I'm just figuring out the best placement for that apple cider jug, and I decided to go with down in front of the bushel of apples beside the small pumpkin. And then I'll take one of those clusters of leaves and tuck that behind the apple cider so that we get those nice little pops of color, and then just fill in the scene even more. I'll take the other little cluster of leaves and add that between the two pumpkins on the left. And I'm just going to continue working my way around and filling in everything by adding in all of these different little elements. I love a nice full scene that has so much detail and just so many things to look at. So that is what I wanted to do for today. I'm going to put one of those little apples down at the base of the tree so that can be just fallen down. I tucked another one over next to the large pumpkin on the left so that we get a little pop of that red over there. I'll add in some of those little grass clusters as well. That helps push some of the other items further back in the scene. Just because it's all a one layer card doesn't mean that it has to look flat. We can still build that depth of scene by layering different elements on top of each other, which is going to push certain ones back and pull certain ones forward and just create depth in that way. I thought about putting one of those little apples on top of the treat cart, and I think that would have looked really cute, but there wasn't enough room left below the sentiment, so I ended up just placing that down below, down in front. I added a few leaves and grasses in front of the little tree stump, and I'm going to add in one last little leaf there. And I tried the last leaf cluster as well, but it just wasn't going to fit. So I ended up just not using these elements. So they'll go in my dish of pre-colored images, which I'm collecting quite a lot of right now. And so I'm going to have to do a video using pre-colored images fairly soon. To polish this card off and pull in that cool tone of the treat cart, I decided to add a stitched rectangle frame, and I die cut that out of some hyacinth cardstock from Lawn Fawn, and I'm going to glue that right over the top of the scene to just frame everything in, and I really like how that looked. Then all that's left is to add a bit of sparkle, so I'm going to take some Stardust Stickles, and I decided to place that on all of my apples since there were quite a few on this scene. I even put it on the tiny apple on the cider jug, and that is going to be it for this one. So I'll lift that up so you can see it in a bit more detail, and I'll give you another peek at the inside of the card. I had so much fun creating this happy little scene, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to give the video a like and leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All of the products I used will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in the next. Bye-bye!